My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
So I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program,
I am cloud hired.
See! I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the Glow Cloud team.
Welcome, everyone. Today we are here to discuss the various types of architects. Solutions architects versus cloud architects versus enterprise architects. And Alonzo and I will go over each role. We'll talk about some of the things that we do in each type of a role so you truly understand the difference. At some point, I will whiteboard some various types of architectures that you might see in a solution architect versus a cloud architect versus an enterprise architect. And I really want you to understand these roles. And this way, you'll be able to figure out what's best for you. What do you really like to do? And then I'll talk about how you can progress in each one of these roles. If you like, Alonzo, make sure I remember to talk about the progression from these roles to other roles along the way. But they're all great roles. For the most part, I've held every one of these kinds of roles in the last 25 years, and I've enjoyed them all. I do have my preferences, and I'll tell you why I have my preferences for various roles. But that's what we're going to talk about today. So give me a hashtag solutions architect or a hashtag cloud architect or a hashtag enterprise architect with what you think you want to do. And then when we're done, I'm going to ask you to do that same thing, engage the audience. And do you still think you want to do the same kind of architect role? So please give me a hashtag that says the kind of architect that you think is right for you right now. Because we're going to dispel a lot of myths today. And we're going to talk about a lot of these roles. So I hope you can understand that. While I wait to see some of your responses in the chat box, because I love to know who our audience is, I would like to tell you that this week we have a completely free How to Become a Cloud Architect webinar. And it is going to be on Zoom. You can learn about the role, the cloud architect role. You'll learn about exactly what we do. You'll learn exactly the skills you need. And I'll spend upwards of 90 minutes answering any questions you may have. Questions about your background, questions about your career, questions about your goals. You think you're ready, but you're going on interviews and they're not hiring you. When you think it's your experience, I'll give you a mini interview and we'll find out what's actually going on. And we're going to do that, and it's going to be completely free. This week, we've got a wide variety of guests. Tomorrow, Mark Milovanovic and I are going to have a BGP workshop. And not only will we have a live BGP workshop where I'm going to go over the BGP protocol and how the finite state machine works and the BGP message types, all that good fun stuff. And we'll even get into traffic engineering. And as a bonus, we're going to have a sign up if you want. And we've got a good 10 hours of BGP labs for you to truly learn about all these things. So I kind of hope that actually works for you. And because it's the end of the year, we decided to start off our year-end discount now, which will get you 50% off of any of our training programs. The coupon code for that is year-end, all one word, YEAREND. So let's start talking about these kinds of technologies. So I'm excited to go over the world of architecture, and we'll begin with the three roles. I'm going to at some point show you a slide that Alonzo actually helped me draw, because Alonzo is very good in all these architecture roles. He's, in addition to being a great architect, he works side by side with me, and he's got a great way to present information. So I'm going to start by sharing a slide, discussing the slide, and then I'm going to talk about what this actually means and the impact in the role a little bit later. Like, I'm going to dive deeper into each one of these things. So let me bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to show something to you that I think will help kick off some of the understanding of these roles. Bear with me. Got to find the right one. I run a lot of desktops and a lot of monitors. It's the only way that I can see what's going on, keep various things on my screen. I've got 4 of these 27-inch monitors here, so things get a little busy on moving stuff around. Okay, great. So perfect. So I'm going to share this. Tyrone, please do whatever is necessary to make sure this works. I will reduce the size of this kind of quickly. Okay, where are we over here? And go a little bigger. I'm going to get that a little bigger. So when we look at this, and this is just going to be a gross summary, I'm going to highlight these 3 roles. And let's say we've got a solutions architect, like a cloud solutions architect, and we have solutions architects in networking. We have solutions architects in other places. We're typically dealing with tactical solution design, meaning we're dealing with, typically speaking, one vendor's technology or a small number of vendors' technology. We're typically talking about an architect that in most cases works for the vendor themselves. So if you're a solutions architect with Cisco, you're designing, presenting, and selling some component from Cisco. If you're an AWS solutions architect, you're going to be designing, presenting, and selling AWS stuff. If you're an Azure solutions architect, you're going to be designing, presenting, and selling Azure stuff. So most of these architectures are going to be limited to this single cloud that the focus of this architect is, or a single technology. For example, we may have a solutions architect that works for AWS that focuses on contact centers, and we'll have another solutions architect that can be there to help you with cloud security, and there'll be another solutions architect that's going to be an expert in this. So typically speaking, single vendor, which is one of the reasons it's not incredibly strategic. Single vendor means severe performance limitations in many cases because some vendors do certain things better. And for example, if Microsoft does AI best and AWS has the biggest infrastructure and the most powerful infrastructure, and Google has some expertise in big data, it might make sense to use all those expertise from each one. But a solution architect will typically design the things that are from the cloud provider. So if a solutions architect recommends DynamoDB, because they're only looking at it from their perspective, it's going to lock that customer into AWS and make it much harder for them to deal with other businesses. Because the solutions architect is the technology company that they typically work for, and that's what they're doing. So with a solutions architect, they're still going to be designing scalable systems. They'll be designing secure systems. Now, solutions architects in general are going to participate in pre-sales activities. That means client meetings, client lunch, client entertainment. That typically means sales meetings internally where you're with the account team and they're going to say how much you're going to sell per week or who your clients are that you think are going to close in the next corner, and you're building planning for what the amount that could be sold with the account teams. We might be looking at the organization's existing infrastructure and saying, how do we move it to our environment? So a lot of gathering requirements of technical and business needs that need to occur, just like all architects. But we're still focused on more tactical things like cost optimization. Okay, this year we spent $1 million a month. How do we get it to $900,000 a month? Is that important? I don't know. If the technology is promoting an opportunity and it's increasing the business performance, sometimes it's worth spending more money, not less money, to really get the business to its outcome. So typically tactical, less strategic, and that's the least strategic of all the architects. Now, the architect will still be designing disaster recovery plans. Unfortunately, they'll typically be designing them in the same cloud. And if you're going to disaster recovery, you would never do disaster recovery in your same company, your same network. So they typically do that, but it's least strategic disaster recovery. They typically deal with cloud migration strategies. They typically maintain cloud architecture documentation. Now, when there's going to be a proof of concept by a customer and that customer wants to try the technology, the solutions architect will build that team of the engineers that are going to actually deploy that proof of concept. So very good role here, very fun role here. But the key to remember is if you're working for AWS, you have to know the AWS stuff a little better than any of these architects. If you're working for Azure, you need to know the Azure stuff better because you're now working for that vendor, typically speaking, or you only know one component of the entire architecture, which means it's the least from strategic. Now, and of course, we'll draw architecture diagrams so you can see the difference too when we talk about it even more. So the next phase up is a cloud architect. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this occurs at every company other than AWS. AWS made up a funny term, cloud architect there, which is a technical architect, which is more of an engineer than an architect in general. But for the rest of the organizations in the world, a cloud architect is this multi-vendor, multi-cloud architect, which means they're going to be designing private cloud and hybrid cloud and multi-cloud and hybrid multi-cloud architectures. Now, why does this matter? A private cloud like Nutanix or OpenStack or VMware, typically speaking, will give us the greatest performance, the least amount of latency. It will typically cost the least of all of our architecture models for systems that run all the time. So if I'm going to build this artificial intelligence and I need 1,000 NVIDIA and H100 GPUs or H200 GPUs, it's going to be a lot cheaper for me to buy these GPUs and run them in my data center than it would be to rent them out per month, potentially 20 or 30 times cheaper. Now, if I have a solution that doesn't run 24 hours a day, that's very sporadic like the cloud, that could be something we'd easily do on the cloud and leverage the cloud's auto scaling, like a website, for example. Or it might be best to run 50% of my systems in the technology that I own in my private cloud, and then distribute the remaining 50% to, say, AWS and Google, or AWS and Azure. So cloud architect is multi-cloud. Now, imagine you have to be a multi-cloud architect. Now, in this case, you no longer need to be super specific about each because you're focusing on everything, and the solutions architects will help you with various components. You might find a solutions architect that specializes in networking that's going to be part of your cloud architecture team. You might find a solutions architect that's an expert on, say, a certain type of database that'll be part of your architecture team. And when you're the cloud architect, you're going to have to manage these architects, and they're going to have to help you with proof of concept and your architecture designs, because the person at AWS can worry about which version of Elastic Block Storage they're using. Do we use IO1? Do we use IO2? Because they're going to know the specifics of that because they don't have to know that many clouds. They can focus on that. But now I'm a cloud architect, and it's like, look, I need 1 million IOPS. I need 7,000 megabit per second of throughput. And that's the cloud architect thing. And then you can go dig down the weeds. The solution architect can figure out what you need. Of course, the cloud architect could also do that, but the closer the cloud architect gets to the technology, the less they're going to be able to see the big picture. So now here you're typically building an architecture team, and David Lithicum and I, we say 15 to 50 people, typically speaking, in our cloud architecture teams that we build. And we're going to be building teams for everything: AI, storage, compute, networking, security, everything. We're going to have to lead a design team for here. So you can see this is becoming about 75% business and 25% tech, where the solutions architect was about 50-50. Now here we're going to be developing cloud migration strategies. We may be dealing cloud risk mitigation strategies. We're going to be looking to optimize our cloud costs and resource optimization still at this level. And we're going to be evaluating and selecting third cloud providers and third-party services, which means in most cases, to put it into concept, most jobs are for cloud architects because 98% of enterprises use more than one cloud. Same thing with even regular businesses. 89% of businesses of all size actually use more than one cloud. And the reality is it's not more expensive to put 50% of your stuff in AWS and 50% of your stuff in Azure, because you're paying each one roughly 50% less, minus a few little things. So you're dealing with this, your bigger business. Anybody that matters is using more than one cloud. Now here we're going to be looking at third-party services, because now that we're looking at multiple clouds, now we're going to be having to deal with various applications that are going to be on these clouds. Now, poof, let's go up to the enterprise architect. Now, in the enterprise architecture role, I take out my Armani and Canali suits. I put on my polished shoes when I go meet with clients. And now it's completely different. Now we're creating technology roadmaps and they're aligning them with business objectives. We're identifying areas of improvement in IT processes and systems. We're assessing and mitigating IT related risks. We're aligning our IT initiatives with the overall business strategy. We're helping our client redesign business processes that can benefit from new technology that actually exists. Now we're designing scalable, more importantly, agile solutions that enable the business to do what it needs faster. Now we're developing and enforcing architecture standards. So now we're dealing typically with global organizations because they're enterprises and they can have 10 different business units. And we want to make sure there's not one business unit that's a weakness to the system. So now we're creating architecture standards. We're typically creating architectural review boards in this situation. We're typically working with enterprise architecture frameworks. We're typically designing corporate-wide governance. We're typically building great change control procedures and processes. We're now about writing down best practices and sharing it. And as you can see, this job is predominantly business. And it's a very different kind of a job. And they're all good. So what are the implications of this salary-wise if you actually look at it and why? If you understand that what we're actually dealing with is we're dealing with as we go up, closer to the business. So if I'm in an enterprise architect world, I'm at the C-suite level all the time. I'm probably already considered to be a director or a VP in my organization. I probably report directly to the chief information officer, potentially higher. As an enterprise architect, I might also be called the chief technology officer. I might also be called a chief architect. And in some cases, the chief enterprise architect, actually always the chief enterprise architect is always the chief information officer. So you can see that's that enterprise architect world. Now, versus the cloud architect world is now, how do I manage my infrastructure on my OpenStack, AWS, Azure, and Google clouds? Now, that's still pretty darn big if you really think about it, because now I could have 500 applications across these cloud providers. I could have petabytes of data. I can have 15, 20, 30, 45, 50,000 servers that I'm actually working with. That's still pretty big for cloud architecture. And when you compare that, now I want you to think, can you really remember the vendor idiosyncrasies of things? Of course you can. Could you ever remember how to write a JSON policy for IAM? Of course you can. Could you even be concerned about the AWS or Azure proprietary stuff that you can't use? It's not relevant to you. You're not using DynamoDB. You're not using ECS. You're not using AWS WAF. You're not using Amazon Aurora. You're not using any of that stuff. You're not even going to be using AWS DNS or Route 53 in a multi-cloud environment, because AWS then becomes your single point of failure. Great. We use AWS DNS, but we have web servers in Azure, Google, and OpenStack. AWS DNS goes down and we got nothing. How are you going to reach these servers? You won't know their IP addresses. So you can see as it changes. So now I need to think about what is all that icky stuff, that proprietary stuff that creates technical debt for my clients, and let's get it out and let them use it in the first place. And this could, I'm not referring to AWS's technology. It could be Azure Cosmos DB. It could be Google Cloud Bigtable. They're all great pieces of technology. They're awesome. But do I want something that locks me into a specific situation for the rest of my life? Or do I want something that I can say, okay, this cloud provider raised my rates. Goodbye, cloud provider. I'm repatriating. And guess what? Cloud architects are now working on cloud repatriation. Most businesses are involved in getting stuff off of the cloud because the solutions architect told them they make it better, faster, and cheaper, but it got 2 to 3 times more expensive. It got less secure, and they had performance issues. So nobody's reached that goal. 70 to 80% of architectures are failing, and that's why we need more emphasis on cloud architecture and enterprise architecture. And now we go back to the solutions architecture. Now I'm getting pretty thinking, and we're thinking of more things. So let me map out some basic architectures. Now, I don't want you to think that architecture is ever going to be just pictures, because that's not architecture. But but at least the pictures that I'm going to draw with you are going to actually give you a representative sample of what this would be like. Now, if it was real world architecture, these pictures would come with hundreds of pages of documents, which is no big deal because your architecture team is going to help you make them. You're not responsible for doing this stuff yourself, which is why you need good leadership teams. So let me do this. Let me go back and find my broadcast software. Bear with me. Here we go. So let me, oops, wrong one. Let me share this. So in this first one, I'm going to draw something that looks a lot like solution architecture for you to see. And it's going to look something like this. This would be, say, Route 53. Here's your external facing load balancer. So we'll call it an elastic load balancer because we're going to use AWS terms. And then under here, let's say these are our web servers. So we'll call these things EC2. Oops. And then in our solution architecture, we're going to be actually fairly specific in types of the block storage we would be using. So we might say EBS I02 or IO2. And that way, we're being very specific about what we have. And then we might, let's say we've got an application server. So let me move these up. I don't think, bear with me, I want to create some more space. And then we're going to show you the difference between cloud architecture next. And then with enterprise architecture, I actually have some really fun drawings that I'm going to share with you. They're from Spark Systems, and they're big players in enterprise architecture. And their documents were so good, I thought I would just use theirs. And then, okay, so these are our web servers. Now, of course, we understand that the IP address of the load balancer itself has to be a public. So normally I would call it a public IP address, but here we're going to call it an elastic IP address because it's AWS. And now we're going to need another set of load balancers for our application servers. And now we've got something similar, very specific to what we're doing. Obviously, I would add our internet gateways, and obviously I would add our firewalls, but this is very specific to AWS. And we're gonna make it very basic like this. And what you'll see is we'll have 2 availability zones, and they each kind of have this. And this is the most basic. Now, we can do this with open services on just AWS, and we can add other clouds as needed, or we can use one of those cloud proprietary services, which is going to make our life miserable. Here's the problem with this architecture. Right now, we've put it into 2 availability zones. Guess what? Let's have some fun. Let's put it into 2 availability zones and so 2 regions. So you think we got something good here? I mean, now we've got 4 data centers, 2 parts of the world. Now, what happens if AWS DNS goes down? You got nothing. What happens if AWS's DNS gets hit with a massive DDoS attack that it can't survive? You've got nothing. What happens if someone launches a massive DDoS attack across the AWS backbone? You've got nothing. Let's say AWS gets hacked and is taken down. You've got nothing. What happens if the AWS control plane goes down? You've got nothing. So what did you do here? The solution architect almost always actually designs single points of failures into their situation. But they're focused on what their provider works, because the solution architect typically works for a vendor. So that's showing you solution architect. Again, it's not a bad architecture, but it's only a single part of the entire solution. Only 11% of companies actually do this. And these are small to medium businesses that do this. No big business would ever do something like this. So now let's talk about a cloud architecture. And let's look at what it might start looking like. So in this particular environment, let's say we've got DNS. Now the DNS is going to be a little different, and I'll explain to you what I mean by this. Let's say this is OpenStack. Because this is pretty common. Let's take this, make 2 more of them. AWS. Azure. And why organizations do this in this particular environment, which I was drawing and meant to share with you, we can set up a DNS policy that says the following: send 50% of the traffic to our main cloud because we already paid for it, then send 25% to AWS and Azure. And if either one of these clouds go down, it'll just load share across these 2 clouds. And auto scaling would occur in the clouds, and the systems will be up to peak capacity pretty quickly. Now, when we're looking at DNS, what does this mean? Now it means we need to place DNS servers in each cloud. And obviously that's going to go in a virtual machine. And typically this is how high availability DNS would work. You would put your DNS servers in all 3 clouds. Now, because your DNS servers are in all 3 clouds, if anything that's hosted in Azure goes away, it doesn't matter. This DNS server no longer communicates with the top level domains, and all of Azure is gone. And then DNS knows to route your traffic, vice versa. So it's one of the reasons people are going to run their own separate series of DNS. Now, let's say we're dealing with a database now. Let's say we're dealing with another single website, and then I'll extrapolate this to various architecture views so you can see different places of this. So now we have a website, which means we need a load balancer, typically speaking, because we want to have more than one web server. So typically speaking, we'll have some kind of a load balancer. That could be an application load balancer, network load balancer. I'm just going to call it a load balancer for right now. Then we're going to have our web VMs. And we don't even need to make it look pretty at this point because people understand at this level what we're dealing with. Now, these virtual machines we're using are identical to the technology that VMware came up with in 1999. So the cloud providers just made different names. AWS calls it EC2, Azure calls it an Azure Virtual Machine. Google, for whatever marketing purposes, called it a compute engine instance. Now, what else are we going to have? We're typically going to have another load balancer, right? And then we're going to have our application virtual machines. So we're going to pop that in all 3 clouds. Okay, now we're probably going to have a database, right? So let's just say for some reason we were going to use Apache Cassandra. Where are we going to put our Apache Cassandra? On virtual machines. So let's say we used a database. Let's say it's Cassandra. And why did I pick Cassandra? Is it can write on all nodes and all nodes can synchronize itself. And there's many other databases that can do this. Oops, not what I was trying to copy. Now all my databases are synchronized across my clouds. And that's my same web thing. Now, these webs are going to need a element of security, right? So now I'm going to create a new viewpoint for the security that we're going to use for these web systems. And as it turns out, I made it a little earlier today. I wanted to pre-make it. So now we're talking about what each cloud provider needs. So each cloud provider is going to need a content delivery network. Now, if you look at any businesses out there, they're not going to be crazy, I promise you, to use a single content delivery network. In fact, all of you, let's have some fun. Open up a Windows PowerShell prompt. Open up a terminal window in in a Mac or a Linux machine, and I would like you to type this: NS November Sierra lookup Lima Oscar Kilo Uniform Papa. So NS lookup, and then type www.amazon.com. And I would like you to put the response that you actually get in that chat box. And I want to see which content delivery networks you guys are getting. And guess what? I'll do it too. And I want you to see something. And I want you to actually tell me the content delivery network that you're actually using. So for example, when I do an NS lookup, the content delivery network that I'm using to reach Amazon.com is Frontier. And I'll put that NS lookup information into the chat box so you can see it. Now, why am I, when I connect to Amazon, using Frontier as different? Or why might you get Fastly when you come up? Or why might you get Akamai when you run this? Because Amazon's not going to architect a single point of failure into their architecture, and they're going to use multiple content delivery networks too, which means they have people designing their systems that are focused on higher level things other than solutions architects. They're using the bigger architects that are focusing on that. But let's look at the security architecture, and I want you to notice something we're going to deal with. So the point of using a content delivery network is obviously it's going to make the web server scale, it's going to cache it, but it's also going to help us with a DDoS perspective. And the reason is we can set up some protection on these content delivery networks that if it sees anomalies or bad requests or a bunch of TCP SYNs coming in, it'll block it, and it won't let those bad requests go to the web servers and overwhelm our systems. Now, then we might say for these web server demilitarized zones, we might need a network load balancer to front end 2 next generation firewalls. Now, obviously, these firewalls are going to have to be in every single cloud provider. So we're going to have to pick a next generation firewall like a Palo Alto firewall or a Fortinet firewall or a Cisco firewall or a Checkpoint firewall. Now, this thing might need real security. So maybe we use another level of next generation firewalls, because if any of you like martial arts, if you were going to be a martial arts expert, you would go to the Philippines and learn Kali or Eskrima, for example, for edged weapons and sticks, or you might go to Indonesia and learn Salat, again, for edged weapons and stick. Now, what happens if you get knocked on the ground as a martial artist? Well, then you need some kind of Brazilian jiu-jitsu to be able to deal with ground fighting. And what happens if you actually have to strike? Well, Muay Thai has powerful strikes. So the way different martial arts all have, for example, various things, I want you to understand that each firewall has its strengths, so you may use more than one. Now, what else might we include? Even though our firewalls have intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, it might make sense to include some IDS IPS systems here, because these IDS IPS systems may stop something that our firewalls won't, and maybe they catch other patterns of behavior and they send a specific set of logs to our SIEM systems, our security event monitoring systems, that are going to correlate our logs. And okay, now we know that we're done that. We're in the demilitarized zone. We need a public IP address on the load balancer. And of course, those firewalls are only going to allow HTTPS, which is TCP port 443, through their firewalls. This load balancer itself will have some form of an access list on itself. The web servers will be in a private subnet, and these servers themselves would have to, say, be hardened, anti-malware, patching the systems, removing unnecessary services, closing ports, that kind of thing. Host-based IDS, IPS systems. And then you would typically have another set of load balancers go to your application servers. And of course, you'd have your SIEM system for managing logs and correlating logs and ideally finding problems before they occur. And then you'd have your IAM system to determine who you are, what you're allowed to do, and keep track of it. We'll probably have some data loss prevention systems. So what didn't we talk about here yet? There was not a single product name that we actually discussed. Not a single one. You didn't hear the word Elastic, because you're not going to. You didn't hear the word EC2. Now I'm at a higher level, and I'm not going to be able to remember as a multi-cloud architect all the idiosyncrasies of the AWS various forms of block storage and their performance limitations. Now, if I need to, I'm just going to go check it on the AWS website, but it's not going to be things that are in my mind all the time. I'm going to be focused on bigger things. I'm going to be focusing on bigger problem solving. So the cloud architect is a more business-oriented, more strategic architect than the solutions architect, which is typically why they have a bit better pay. Now we're getting into the king and the queen of the architect roles, the enterprise architect role. And first, I'm going to talk about a lot of things we do as enterprise architects, because I love this role. But whatever role you do, they're all great. It's just going to be which one is best for your personality. I train cloud architects. They get solution architect jobs easily because I train them for cloud architects, because I made them better. And then solution architecture is easy for them. I train enterprise architects and they get cloud architects. So you can be whatever you want. But well, now I'm an enterprise architect and I'm developing and maintaining architecture frameworks. I'm creating technology roadmaps that are going to be aligned for the business objective. This year, we're trying to increase sales. So these are our business objectives this year. And a recommendation engine that's based upon AI for our sales website. We're improving our contact center to be able to get information better and direct people to the best customer service rep. And that's going to basically create an expert system in our unified communications platform. And that can take care of that intelligent routing to a person that's available and on duty. Now, if you think you know unified communication systems the way a CCIE voice or what the equivalent does, you don't. So that means you're bringing in a person for something like that. We're dealing with a lot of future state architecture models as enterprise architect now. In all architecture roles, we're collaborating with stakeholders. But in the enterprise architecture job, we're collaborating with stakeholders. We're creating stakeholder relationships. We're working on stakeholder buy-in, and it's just so much stakeholder work. Now, the average enterprise has 200 to 1,000 different applications, in addition to maybe 100,000 IP addresses, in addition to, say, 15,000 locations. So now we got to coordinate all that stuff. Now, just think about that. Could you learn the idiosyncrasies of 1,000 different applications? I promise you can. While you're at it with 1,000 different applications, can you be a BGP master? Can you be an interior gateway protocol master? At the same time, can you deal with that organization's wireless systems as well as their unified communications and their voice systems and all of their security systems, all of their IAM systems, whether it's biometric or not, any kind of other additional backup systems, be an expert in storage, be an expert in security, be an expert in compute, be an expert in the various kinds of computing, whether GPU computing, CPU computing, quantum computing. You're not. And at this level, it's much more about business. It's typically much more about leading teams. And we're going to be dealing with overseeing system integration efforts, enforcing and developing architecture standards and best practices, leading architecture review boards, creating and maintaining enterprise data models, designing for agility. We're going to be looking at which are the best technologies, and we're going to be doing a lot of vendor evaluation against our requirements. We're going to manage now vendor relationships because we're going to have 1,000 of them or so. So we've got a lot of vendors to deal with, cloud provider vendors, networking vendors, security vendors. We're going to be doing a lot of strategic planning sessions, developing reference architectures. Okay, every demilitarized zone will look a certain way, for example. We'll be doing proof of concept testing, leading it, just like all other architects. We're not going to get our hands dirty. But now we're going to be doing more of the developing and maintaining IT capability models and optimizing application portfolios and trying to get rid of the technical debt that we have in our systems. So that's an example of some of these things. Now, what do architecture documents actually look like when we actually get ourselves into the world of enterprise architecture? Well, I'm going to show you that because I think it's going to be valuable for you. In this case, I'm using Spark Systems diagrams. They're freely available on the internet. I will pop the link to where we found them. But they do a good job. They're big players in enterprise architectures, in certain cases software. So I just wanted you to see it in the way that they actually did it because I thought it was very smart. Let me get all my ducks in a row so I can share this with you. And then after that, I will start doing so. So here's an example of an enterprise architecture diagram that I would share with you. And I'm going to put the link to this graphic. And I'll explain what I actually mean by viewpoints and other things along the way. So when we get involved in an environment like this, see if I can find a way to maximize this a little better. Bear with me. Here, what we're dealing with is we're looking at the relationships of things going in to the business. So, for example, pretend we're dealing with an insurance processor or a medical billing environment, and we have to look at what happens. The customer's got insurance. How do they deal with what they need to? What's necessary to get the person's information, register a claim, adjudicate or determine whether to pay for it or not, and pay for a claim? which means what are we getting involved in? Do we have to look into the organization's data? Do we have to look more about that person in the CRM system? Now we've got to go look at our data. Now we also have financial systems that are going to be related to the payment of these systems. So this is, by every stretch of the imagination, an enterprise architecture document. I am not sure why I've got some funny colors on that, but that's typically what we're talking about. So let me get another perspective, bring in another enterprise architect document that you can kind of look at and bear with me. And this one, these are all on the Spark Systems page. So let me pop a link to the main corporate page, because lots of great information on enterprise architecture. This is a tool that people use to model businesses. Let me find the link and I'll pop the link to this website so you can check them out and learn more. So I thought they did a great job. Oh, great. Oh, perfect. And this is the main website so you can learn more. So the way where basically we're kind of looking at components of applications and where they are spread on the organization's environment. So in this particular environment, you may see that they've got 3 different locations, and they're parts of the various application and systems at each location. So this is just showing the application perspective. What's missing here? Well, you don't see the underlying infrastructure. You don't see any servers where they're hosted. You don't see the routers and the switches. You don't see the IP addresses. You don't see any of it, because this is at a fairly high level of abstraction. And when we're dealing with that, it gets more businessy, more businessy, more businessy. I'll show you some more architecture documentation so you can start to see things. And you'll see that it all goes down to the same place. So you might be looking at what we have in an environment, or an organization may be reaching several plateaus. There may be things between what they have versus what they need to be in an architecture. So we may have something, and we may need to get to something else, point A to point B. So if we look at the gaps that we have, we can create a gap analysis and determine what we need. The deliverable could be a understanding of the organization's risk. The other deliverable could be risk mitigation planning. The other deliverable could be technical controls to manage risk. So we're going to be looking at different things along the way. Again, these are going to be more at that business oops, I don't know what actually happened there. Bear with me a second. We're going to be looking at these things from a business executive perspective, because we're not dealing as a techie. What we're dealing with is we're trying to create a strategy or a blueprint for that company to achieve greater financial success. And that is going to be a combination of its organization's people, or the organization's processes, or the organization's technology. So I hope that kind of gave you an example of what these representations could look like. And as you can see, as we go up, we get farther and farther away to technology. So what is the implications on salary? Well, that's the interesting thing. And it brings me to the saddest thing in technology. Oops, I don't know what just happened there. Bear with me. And the saddest thing in technology is, for the most part, the closer you are to the tech, the less you will be paid. And to me, this is one of the saddest things. And here's the reason why. I love the tech. In fact, if you ever were to come to my house, you would be absolutely surprised by the ridiculousness of the tech. Because in architect jobs, you don't get to be that techie in your job. You kind of have to find yourself a position where, if you want to play with the tech, it becomes your hobby or your passion project, because it's not going to be your job if you want one of these higher paid architect roles. So like in my house, for example, I've got an OpenStack cloud with 12 servers in it now. I've got RAID arrays for my storage. I don't need it, but I'm running 64-core workstations to stream my video with multiple GPUs, because I know at some point there'll be a bottleneck on the system, because I'll end up using an 8K camera because I like the tech. It's fun. It's hobby. It's my passion. Is it smart? No. And that's why it's my hobby for my home. Big computer to edit 8K video that I might record on my mirrorless DSLR camera. So I could be doing something like that, or I could be working with crazy images, because that's my hobby. So my hobby demands crazy things. But in your job, what are you going to have to do? going to have to re-architect business processes. You're going to have to lead large teams. You're going to have to develop strategic planning. You're going to have to facilitate meetings in any one of these roles. You're going to have to lead proof of concept. You're going to have to lead design strategies across people. That's the job. So I kind of hope this works. So now let's look at a couple of continuum things that you can see across the way. And there are ways that you can stay in more of these technical roles and you can earn more. And there are ways that you can move into business roles, which will ultimately pay the most. And you don't have to do anything. I just want you to understand what your options are. And I'll give you some examples along the way. So if we start looking at the various architecture careers and various technology careers, you can see that those DevOps engineers and cloud engineers, which are clearly the most technical, earn the least. Now, what you'll also notice is we reach this cloud architect realm, and the average pay is $201,000, but the pay range is in that $153 to $269. So some sales bonuses in there. And there are cloud architects like David Lithicum and me that when we do cloud architecture and focus on the cloud, we start with the C-suite and we get the vision of the business. We understand the business processes because a really great cloud architect will do this too, like an enterprise architect, which is, like I say, the best cloud architects know enterprise architecture. They'll be creating strategic blueprints. So you can see that cloud architect range starts about 153, but goes to about 270. And you can see that the enterprise architect's average pay is about 210, but it's a higher base that we're typically talking about. So the enterprise architect salaries are typically more stable. They're more or less related to sales commissions. And then you can see there's a lot of wiggle room in these enterprise architect roles. And the reason some of these salaries look low for these enterprise architect roles are as follows. They are not representing other enterprise architect roles that actually exist. So let me show you this. And the funny thing about, maybe I'm sharing the wrong slide. The funny thing about architect salaries is you've got three ways you can go. And I want you to all know what they were because I've held all these kinds of roles. So if you want to stay technical in your career, really want to stay technical, you can go down the path and become a principal architect. So you could do that as a cloud architect. You could do it as a principal solutions architect. In fact, my second architect job back in 2001 was a principal architect, a principal solutions architect more specifically. And in that role, I was typically involved in the most strategic architectures that involved IP multicast because nobody knew IP multicast. So every time there was a big multicast product or sale, one of the sales engineers or solutions architect would bring me in as that multicast expert. Now in this role, I'm a subject matter expert on the various technology. I typically have a good degree of business acumen because I'm going to be presenting all the time. I'm going to be letting thought leadership document all the time. I'm going to be advising clients. I'm going to be involved in the most strategic clients. I'm going to be involved in getting requirements from the customer and feeding it into our product roadmap. So this becomes a bigger role. And if you like being an architect, you can definitely find yourself in this position and it pays well. Typically speaking, 202 to 312. The cloud providers pay more here, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. Now we get into this distinguished architect. Now this is a very special architect. So in addition to having the technical capabilities of the principal architect, now with the distinguished architect, I'm talking about someone that's going to be working with the Internet Engineering Task Force working groups. They may have some patents. They're involved in every major conference. They're known as an industry-wide thought leader. So at Cisco, we had 80,000 people. And of the 80,000, the distinguished team was 350. So it's a very small perspective. And when you get to work with these folks, they're incredible. As it turns out, I'm going to have a distinguished architect on our channel in Russ White this week. And he spent about 2 decades in that role. He's someone great to learn from. Big industry expert forever. I was headed down that direction in my youth when I worked as a principal architect, where I was feeding information into roadmaps. And then I learned something very quickly from a manager, which changed my life. My manager said, Mike, you actually understand business. I said, yeah. He said, you like the business. I said, yeah. And he said, you're limiting yourself with your tech. I said, huh? And he said, Mike, I enhance your business skills. I enhance your leadership skills. I enhance your executive presence. We boost up your CXO relevancy and emotional intelligence. And now you're not the person planning this weird tech stuff and the expertise on this. Now you're in a much more business-oriented role. You're in an enterprise architect role, and many are called chief architects. Now, basically what happened was my salary doubled almost overnight when I went from that solutions architect to that chief architect. And it was a much better role. Now in this role, I was designing technology solutions for the entire industry, healthcare industry. When I was at Cisco, that meant I presented at every healthcare industry conference, which was great. I consulted to various governments throughout the world on improving their healthcare delivery system. I consulted to the world's largest healthcare organizations on how to be better. And I wrote documentation to help organizations understand the risks and strategies and potentially methods to mitigate them. Executive briefings every single day of the week. This was my most fun job ever. And I love it. But what I really went from was I took that cloud architect type and I got an MBA and a bunch of other business skills and do that. And admittedly, it was about $100,000 of training to get into that chief architect role. More than that if you count the MBA. And that's why when we train our enterprise architects, we have that. That's when we have our elite program with our tech leadership program. It's all in there. So you don't have to get that and spend the 100,000 plus that I had to, or Cisco had to for me. So that's kind of why we put those modules in there. And as you look, I want you to understand the other side that you can go. So one way in your architecture career is that you could become a chief architect, which is great, or you could become a principal architect. But now let's get into some of the fun. And when we get into some of the fun, let's talk about company jobs that pay even more that you could potentially also do. Because what do we architects do? Well, we have to meet with executives, right? We have to understand the executives' needs and goals for their business. We have to understand how the client's businesses operate. We have to give a lot of presentations, right? We have to lead large teams. We have to sell and convince clients to do things. What are you hearing here? I hope you're hearing sales rep. I hope you're hearing director. I hope you're hearing VP level. I hope you're hearing EVP level. And I hope you're hearing chief information officer. So why does that matter? If you love that distinguished architect role, go for it. Become a master in your domain. Become the BGP person and learn all your clouds and know everything about BGP, every cool little nerd knob we can use, every workaround, and that's fine. Or do it with any kind of specific technology. You can do it. Or technology platforms. But let's say you want to take your career now to something more businessy. And I'm going to show you the difference in salaries when we go from the solutions architect roles, which in some cases pay almost as much at the principal architect level. And then let's look at the business implications of having better leadership skills and better business acumen. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If we look at AWS, the average principal architect salary is $372. And if we look at Microsoft, the average principal architect salary is $378. And both Microsoft and AWS have a pay range of about $300,000 to $500,000 for those positions. Who earns the most? The people with the best business skills, the people that close the most sales, the people that are the most likable and have the most executive skills. Now, if we all, and Google is about 508, but their pay range is 394 to 677 last time I checked on Glassdoor. Here's what I also want you to see. Now, what happens when we get out of these architecture roles, and architectural roles, we have them. We learn every side of the business. We become great leaders. And then we move into these other roles. Now, a senior director at Cisco on average earns $527. A senior director at Palo Alto pays $540. Why is the IT director at NVIDIA paid so little? Because they're getting a whole lot of stock, which means they're making a whole lot of money. So you can see the architect role transitions nicely into director and senior director roles. And in many cases, the executive architect or a distinguished architect is already a director. So, and often you can, bear with me, you can go from a director level to a VP level as you're moving into these roles, and you can get salaries which are even bigger. So you've got two career options where you want to go. I typically suggest either going down the business path or a tech path, but you'll earn more. you'll have greater opportunities in the business side. But what do you want to do? And that's the question. Do you want to be like me early in my career where I was an expert on IP multicast? And I was an expert on IGMP version 1, IGMP version 2, IGMP version 3, DVMRP, PIM sparse mode, PIM sparse dense mode, and PIM sparse dense mode. And source-specific multicast, for example, multi-protocol BGP used for exchanging information between domains, for example. Anycast RP. So, that was pretty much what I focused on. Now, I didn't just focus on the geeky side of the engineering, which I did. I now focused on what are we doing with these systems. So I was advising internet service providers 20 years ago on how to deliver broadcast TV over DSL and fiber to the home. And I was designing IP voice, data, and video solutions in Dubai, fiber to the home in 2001. It wasn't until about 2015 where people in America actually even had access to that. But what was involved, now I had to learn about harmonic encoders and Tamberg encoders, and now I had to learn about set-top boxes to decode the video signals because it's part of your architecture. And now I needed to learn about the middleware platforms that would be running on these set-top boxes that was going to communicate back and forth. And I had to learn how boxes download a configuration, usually via TFTP when they boot up, to pull to determine what you're actually allowed to actually receive. So you can't get the channels that you didn't pay for, because they're typically encrypted unless you have the decryption key, which is part of your subscription. So I learned each and every one of those things because that was necessary to do my job. And what I do, I designed it, I presented and sold it. But what's the challenge with that? I can give you an example. I can remember I was in Panama delivering a voice or a proof of concept with cable and wireless. And while I was in Panama, I got the call, Mike, how fast can you be in Dubai? And they said, what do you mean, how fast can I be in Dubai? I'm in Panama. And they're like, how fast could you be there? I need you there and overnight. I said, well, okay. From Panama, I've got to go to San Jose and deliver a presentation. From San Jose, I've got to go to New York and deliver a presentation. But I can stop in New York, go to London and deliver a presentation, and then I can go to Dubai. So I can get there in 5 days. And why was it always like that? Because I was the one person that knew IP multicast and IP multicast video. And at the time, there were 5 of us in the world, and we were all distinguished architecture principal architects working on it. That was no fun. I mean, it was fun and it wasn't fun. It was fun until I realized I traveled over 200,000 miles on a single airline network.
No pressure, Mike.
Yeah, none whatsoever. And then I can tell you at Cisco, all of a sudden I'm an enterprise architect in a chief architect role. And it was a little different. Mike, can you come to Australia for a few weeks? Can you meet people in the province of Victoria? Can you meet people here? And they were very different conversations. They were conversations on strategy. They were conversations on various components of the healthcare delivery system, various components of the technology and platforms that could help them. Ooh, now I was having fun because this was exciting for me. And now I was meeting with health ministers, and now I'm meeting with et cetera. So I'm meeting a new set of people. And I'm not getting my hands dirty, which is great. And now my hours are civilized because I might get up at 6 or 7 a.m., go to the gym for 2 or 3 hours, be in the office from 9, take the client out to lunch, give a couple more hours of presentations, discussions in the afternoon, take a client to dinner, some good steak, lobster, some good scotch, some nice wine, which the company paid for. And then poof, I'm asleep and I'm doing it the next day, which is a lot harder than coming in and trying to work with engineers and trying to debug and problem solve all day. And then manage the relationships when people are upset because things aren't functioning as designing, and then feeding in the big problems that we have, and then going up to the VPs of architecture, the VPs of software engineering saying, I need a code fix for this now. And they're saying, yes, but you need to justify your code fix based upon all these other ones. So now you're building a business case in these kind of principal architect roles to show why they need to hire more developers because of the revenue that you're actually going to lose if they can't get something done. So it's a different kind of job, but they're all great. So I think Alonzo and I kind of talked about things. Maybe ask some questions.
That would be great. What kind of questions do we have so far?
Let's see what we got.
From Ahmed, I remember you. It's great to see you again, Ahmed. Hi guys. What's the main of each architect role, and what's its high demand and high paying for now in the future?
Great question. So, enterprise architect roles have been in demand for as long as I can remember. They often have funny names, so you don't see as many of them. They could call them chief architect, they could be chief technology officer, but there's a lot of them. So, lots of opportunities. Now, and Sarabi, I want to actually get to your question soon about, loving both. And you kind of have both, but let's talk about time planning soon, because that's a very critical thing to talk about.
Good to see you, Sarabi.
Now, I'm thrilled to see you. Now, let's talk about demand for cloud architects. Huge. And why is it so huge? The reason it's so huge for cloud architects is as follows. Everybody is multi-cloud. Multi-cloud architect. And when I mean everybody that you would ever want to work for. So 98% of enterprises, and most people want to work for an enterprise because they have the most resources and pay the most, which means as a solution architect, you can only work for 2% of them, not 98% of them. So I don't think that's good skills. And as the cloud architect, you have the ability to also work down as a solutions architect in the event you needed to. And many of the people that I train for cloud architects, like Ivan Tambar or Jordan Katil, for example, or Jawad, I trained them to be cloud architects, but then they went over there to AWS as a solutions architect. Or Balwinder, who was a stay-at-home mom who got hired as a solutions architect at Microsoft. Lots of different opportunities. You can go up and down as you please. But the cloud architecture one is going to be more important because that's dealing with real-world issues. It's going to be less biased. It's going to be focused on business outcomes. The solution architect role has been around forever and a day. Now, they could be, solution architect roles can be a little bit of anything. So we're talking in general principles. Solutions architects may not have anything to do with tech at all. A solution architect could be working with cell phones that are determining which cell phones you should use for your business. So a solution architect is kind of a muddy term. But the solution architect roles are going to be the lowest paying as a rule, except when you work for a cloud provider or a vendor, because you'll be involved in commission structures and things and bonuses related to how much you can sell. So Ahmed, if you can sell good, you'll earn great as a solutions architect. If you don't like to sell and you can't sell very well, well, then ultimately at the end of the day, it's not a role that you'll stay in for very long, and you won't earn a good salary until you're there. So I hope that helps. But they're all good roles. And it's not hard to find a job. Today, one of my students sent me a message that he's 99% sure he's just got an enterprise architect role in the Dallas Metro, and I'm super excited by it. And, I love it. I love it. So there's demand for all of these roles.
King is asking, hi, Mike. What does an enterprise architect perform? When does an enterprise architect perform his technical duties? I'm wondering what kind of technical stuff they are expected to perform.
Okay, King, I'm going to make it clear. No architect does anything technical, meaning hands-on. So you won't find any architect that's writing Python scripts. You won't find them that are writing Bash scripts. You won't find them that are working with Linux, for example. You won't find an architect working with Terraform. You won't find an architect on the command line, and you won't find an architect on the management console. So what are we talking about technical in the roles? So technical in the roles is, okay, now I've got a client. This client has a IP, MPL, and let's just say I've got a client. This client has 6 data centers spread throughout the world. They would like to consolidate those 6 data centers into 3, aggregate the technology from 6 of those data centers into 3, and run private cloud software on there. So we need to do the planning of what is it going to take to get those systems? What is it going to take to do a cutover without downtime? What are we going to have to plan ahead of time? What systems are we going to need to have in place, for example, to prep this? Where's the work? How do we bring our data? Which systems need to be offline when? Now, in order to do that, what changes need to occur? What kind of people do we need to make those changes? That's enterprise architecture. Now, along with that, now we want to consolidate 6 data centers into 3 and then connect to a public cloud provider. Now, we also have to think is what is the connectivity between these 6 data centers? Now we're going to have these 3 data centers have double the load because we're going to consolidate all our equipment. Do we need to build out the network? Do we need more switches? Do we need more routers? No. When we do the network, what systems are going to need to be re-IP addressed? Because if the IP addressing is wrong, it's not going to work. Which DNS servers are going to need to be assessed? What kind of routing protocol is going to be used? What are those network architects actually doing for us? What are they suggesting? Now, what kind of security do we need to make these changes work? on the security architect. So the only thing we're going to do at the enterprise architect level is lead all the appropriate teams and then take the documentation, manage an architecture repository, lead an architectural review board, and also architecture meetings. So you know how a manager would have a once a week or twice a week status meeting with their staff, and they ask their staff, what are you doing? What's coming? What are your deliverables? When are you going to get them, and the progress on that? And that way they can keep track of what's going on. As an enterprise architect, that's your, okay, security team, what do I need to know? Okay, and you're going to be doing this constantly, having these meetings. Okay, network team, what do I need to know? Okay, compute team, what do I need to know? Okay, GPU compute team, what do I need to know? Big data people, what do I need to know? So that's about how technical it's going to get. Not very technical. Like I said, when I talk about this role, this is when I put on my Armani suits and my Canali suits, and I make sure my shoes are polished before I leave my house, and I make sure my belt is polished before I leave my house, and I'm going to be in a boardroom or at that level most of the time. Great question, King.
Sarabi is one of our latest students. Awesome person I've had a pleasure of meeting with. We've had some really great discussions, and we're going to be speaking with some of her friends later on today. But getting to the point, Sarabi's asking, I want to have both technical and business acumen skills.
Sarabi, you're right. You need both. I love it. You can't be an architect without it. And it's one of the main reasons where most of our clients, they've already gone to 18,000 boot camps. They've got 18 million certifications, and they can't get hired because they don't have the right skills. You need business skills and technical design skills and technical understanding of how things work. So I agree with you. But at some point, Sarabi, you're going to have to make a determination of where you focus your time. And here's what I mean. You're going to always have to have a good set of technical knowledge. You have to keep it. But then you're going to have to determine, do you focus on being one of the best tech strategists in the world for technology strategy, or do you focus on being the best business and tech strategist? And the challenge becomes is how do we spend our time? So if you look at jobs that really take a lot of time to master, and granted, I can train somebody to be an architect and get them hired in about a year, but let's talk about mastery of a field. It's at least 10,000 hours in a role, very specific role. So what does that mean? It means if you're going to train a physician to be a cardiologist, they're going to be an expert on cardiology. But you know what they're not going to know anything about? Orthopedics, dermatology, ophthalmology, nephrology, hepatology, hematology, and everything else. Because if they took their focus off of that area of expertise, they're not spending all their time. So in the end, Sarabi, I want you to consider this, that life and careers, they're kind of a competition. They're like the Olympics. And here's what I mean. At the end of the day, it's going to be you versus 3 other people that they're serious about for any good role. And it's going to be your specificity of skills or things that you've actually perfected that are going to make you have that competitive advantage. So imagine now you've got a study plan. For the next year, you're going to be spending a lot of time on tech and business things. And now, a year from now, you got a job. Now you're going to start to figure out what you like. And if you're like me and you say this business thing is my absolute favorite, then poof. Now, for example, you can say, I focus on this, and keep your other skills good enough, but you focus on that. And that's the difference between a champion. It's why when you see Olympic gymnasts, you know what they're great at? Olympic gymnasts. It's when you see Olympic sprinters like Usain Bolt. Honestly, I think it was the coolest guy in the world, the way he ran. When I watched Usain Bolt, I said, wow, he's the best. And if you looked at his training, it was sprinting. It wasn't distance running. So yes, I agree with you. You need both. You're going to have them both. I promise you, you're going to have both. But when you reach a part of your career 5 and 10 years from now, then I want you to figure out what you need most and where you want to go. And then I want you to build a plan around that. Because that's the difference between staying at a $250,000 or $300,000 architect role and getting a $500,000 or $600,000 architect role. And enterprise architects, I can tell you, we were all getting about $250,000 in around 2003. Now, if you took a 2003's monies to today, you can actually see what we're talking about. So probably double. But that's because we were all also working as the equivalent of chief architects or strategy consulting enterprise architects or things like that. So extra business acumen. Great question, and I love it. You were going to learn both.
Ngozi, can one finish as a cloud architect and get a job as a solutions or enterprise architect, or is getting a job specific to just the area you are in?
Ngozi, it depends on how good your training is. So with us, everybody gets some form of our enterprise architecture training to a degree, and everybody gets a lot of cloud architecture training, and we do a little solution architect training in there. And why did I do it? Because Pierre, who was a sailboat operator, got hired as his first job as a solutions architect at LeaseWeb in Canada. It's because Al, who was a sales rep for Kimberly-Clark selling consumer products like tissue, got hired by Deloitte as a senior solutions architect after our training. It's why Vladimir, who was a 24-year-old college student, got his first job as a solutions architect at North Highland. It's because, and these were never people that worked in tech. It was why Noah, who got hired at Ahead again as a solutions architect, or Nicole, the teacher, who got hired as a solutions architect, or Balwinder, who was hired by Microsoft as a solutions architect, or Jennifer, who was hired by JP Morgan Chase as the solutions architect, or Delroy Batt, who was actually hired as a cloud security architect for CDW. And again, he didn't have any tech background before us either. Or whether you're Lenny, who was our video editor, who got hired by Citrix as a solutions architect, or Yvonne Tamba, hired by AWS, for example, or Richard F., who was hired by MUFG Bank as a solutions architect. So lots of times I can train somebody to be a cloud architect and they can easily get a solutions architect job. The problem is most solutions architects don't have the sophistication to do these higher roles like cloud architecture or enterprise architecture because they're not taught. But they're typically speaking a little that when you get these roles, like if you started as a solutions architect, you would have been like me, where I was a solutions architect and my manager sent me to an MBA, which was about, anyway, probably $80,000. And I had close to $100,000 of executive coaches, CXO relevancy training, sales training, presentation training, training on exercising influence, training on strategy, training on consulting. And that's what I did. And that's what I teach in my programs to make sure people have that. But you can get any of these roles.
Steph, can the enterprise architect specialize in a domain, maybe in business, or is the enterprise architect always big picture?
The whole point of an enterprise architect is to have a big picture person. The second you specialize in technology, you're done. Now, there are enterprise architects that focus on big picture strategy for various industries. I'm an example of one. So I was an enterprise architect, and all of a sudden I decided to specialize in healthcare because Cisco asked me to. Why? Because I could practice internal medicine. Prior to that, I was a nurse. Prior to that, I was a paramedic. And actually, I even had a job taking people back and forth from various departments and like paying my way through college when I was really young. So I know every part of the hospital. And I also know what it's like to deal with insurance companies, to deal with pharmaceutical companies, to schedule things with operating rooms. I also know the challenges that exist in a hospital, like nurses spending 24% of the time looking for equipment and every struggle. So now I'm an enterprise architect and I'm designing enterprise-wide strategies for healthcare organizations. I worked with national governments to help them operate more efficiently with technology. So that was domain, healthcare domain, but it's always going to be business.
David, what opportunities present themselves to show you have business acumen?
All right. So and I'm always going to do this in my interview and I can communicate with you, I'm going to ask you a question or somebody, I typically ask a question like a company A has a 7.5% weighted average cost of capital. How would you use that information to determine whether it's better to build a Nutanix cloud or an OpenStack cloud versus AWS? I always ask that, and we always ask business acumen questions like this in an architect interview. What am I gauging to say? I want to know if that person understands that weighted average cost of capital is that organization's cost to acquire capital via the various means of, saying, issuing stock and borrowing money, and what that actually costs. I can then use that cost of capital to calculate a payment structure. So let's say I wanted just one server, an AMD EPYC server with 256 cores, 8 terabytes of DRAM, and an NVMe RAID array. And I went to Dell and I priced it out. It's $300,000 to get that server. Now, that same server with the same storage to run in an AWS after 4 years is going to cost about $6 million. So many people without business acumen believe, oh my God, you have to buy it. And it's too expensive. That's why people go cloud. But that's ridiculous, because I can get that $300,000 server from Dell. And if I look at that cost of capital, say 7%, over the course of 4 years, I'm probably going to pay about $360,000 for that server, which means I'm going to be paying $90,000 per year, or approximately $8,000 per month for that server to rent it. Now, on AWS, I need you to understand that it's going to cost me $6 million for the next 4 years. So what is $360,000 versus that $4 million, or versus that $3 or $4 million in AWS? Now, I also want the person's going to let me know at this point that, well, the company doesn't exactly have to buy the technology. Maybe they don't want to have a capital expense because they don't want to deal with depreciation in their tax planning. Maybe they would prefer with an operational expense, which they could just typically write off. So now we would calculate a lease payment. Let's say that server's worth $300,000 now. And at the end of the 4 years, that server's worth 10%. So now what am I doing? I'm calculating the depreciation on that payment. So now, for example, if I take 300 minus 30, I'm not financing the $300,000. I'm financing the $270,000. And that may decrease my annual cost at least $10,000. Now, that's also going to benefit me in most cases, because when we've got an asset that we have to depreciate over several years, we can only take a bit of those losses each time. But if I've got an OpEx expense like a lease, I can write the whole payment off. And depending upon that organization's revenue, depending upon that organization's expense structure, and that organization's current liabilities and expenses that year, it could be more beneficial for them. So I might actually want to calculate that out and build out a business case. That's the kind of thing that I would look in an enterprise architect or a cloud architect or even a solutions architect. Now, it's also like this. I'll give you another example. Here are the people that come on an architect interview that we politely feed cookies to, and we escort out the door later for 15 minutes, and then we say, come back when you have more experience, which is not meaning they needed experience. It meant they didn't have a skill. And I can show you the difference. So here, the person that comes in and walks in and says, I'm going to help you, Mr. Client. I'm going to set you up some really cool EC2 instances, some really great Elastic Block storage. And we've got this really cool database. We're going to connect you to this DynamoDB. And we're going to use all this cloud native stuff. And it's going to make it much easier for you to maintain your systems. And we believe it'll cost less. Okay, so show me the proof. Show me the money, as Cuba Gooding Jr. said to Tom Cruise in the movie Jerry Maguire. And they're going to say, prove it to me. And that person's going to go, oh. Now, a couple of things happen. If Alonzo, you're my chief information officer. Alonzo, I got some excited EBS style volumes, some exciting EC2 instances. We're going to connect you with a bunch of S3 where you're going to store all your stuff. And we're going to be even able to run some machine learning and artificial intelligence, which, of course, is going to help you. Look at Alonzo's reaction.
No.
Now, let's take another reaction where I'll demonstrate an architect's business acumen. So let's say Alonzo asked me to design a new system, a recommendation system for his e-commerce website. And now Alonzo is my chief information officer. I went in there. Alonzo told me to speak to all stakeholders that I need to and get back to him in 60 days after I have access to the information. So now I meet back with Alonzo. Alonzo, so nice to see you today.
Pleasure to meet you as well, Mike.
So, Alonzo, I really appreciated meeting with you the last time. As we discussed, you were going to connect me to the various stakeholders, and I've had a chance to speak with them. I've learned a great many things that I think you may be interested in. I noticed that you have a lot of people that keep coming back again and again and again, and that's 47% of your population, which is really great metrics compared to the average 32%. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep your customer service, because that looks great. But what I also noticed is your people don't typically spend a lot of dwell time on your site on each visit, which means by not being there, there's less opportunities for them to purchase. Upon speaking with your team, we found that you've got such good data that you've been collecting for the last 3 years. Not only do your organization have good data storage, but they're actually using artificial intelligence, and you have a lot of information. When we look through this information, we found that you've got information that we could use to create a recommendation engine. And typically speaking, when we work with AI recommendation engines for e-commerce websites, we're typically able to generate a 2 or 3% increase in your actual revenue. Now, that means if you did $20 billion of revenue right there, 3% is worth $600 million to you. Now, the good news here is, Alonzo, as I've got a list in this protocol of specifications, it's only going to cost about $300,000 one time to actually implement that system, which will yield you a $300,000 return, 300 million return on investment in your first year, and a 600 million return on investment over the next 5 years. So what we're talking about is a $300 million expense that's going to yield about 3.3. That's going to yield for you an investment of over $3 billion over the next 5 years.
Yeah, that is definitely something I'm interested in listening to more about, Mike. Please share.
So, Alonzo, I've written some summary things down. Here's a document that I've written that my architecture team has written for you. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you in 2 weeks after you've had a time to read it, where we can first sit down with you, maybe your CFO and your CIO, and really get your perspectives. If you like it, then we'll start going to other stakeholders to get their perspective, because we want to make sure we don't miss a thing.
Absolutely, Mike. Looking forward to another discussion.
Yeah. So, David, that's how we're showing our business acumen. I'm not talking about the tech. Alonzo doesn't care about the tech. He's the person that writes the check. You know, people and companies don't buy tech for a reason. They buy technology as a tool to make their business better. So that's an example.
Claude, there are a few cloud architect jobs compared to cloud engineers. So what's the problem with starting with cloud engineering, Mike? What are the downsides of being a cloud engineer first?
Well, Claude, let's say you spend the next 15 years as a cloud engineer and your desire is to become a cloud architect. 15 years from now, you're going to need to go training to become a cloud architect. Because coding as a cloud engineer, configuring as a cloud engineer, writing a Terraform script will not teach you how to design it. Never. And every time I have an engineer that's first, they say, I've been an engineer. And I ask them a question. Let's say you're a cloud engineer. And I ask you, could you explain the BGP protocol to me? Could you explain the BGP finite state machine? Could you explain how we could load share without getting out of order packets across 2 links with different internet service providers? You're not going to know. And you'll have no idea, because learning how to configure doing this. I also want to make it clear, Claude, that we had a great cloud engineering program because I love engineers and I stopped selling it. I expect massive layoffs in the world of cloud engineers. And here's the reason I expect massive layoffs. Right now, AI can write a Terraform script. AI can write a Python script. AI can write a Bash shell script. AI can use common DevOps tools. So my bottom 50% of cloud engineers aren't as good as the AI. So I'm going to hire AI long before I'm going to hire a cloud engineer. And when I hire a cloud engineer, now I'm talking for someone with CCIE level networking, CISSP level security, really good Red Hat certified engineer level Linux. We're talking the solutions architect professional is not even an intro to anything. I'm going to have people that are going to have really good skills. So it's totally up to you to build a cloud engineering career. Understand many of these roles are being removed. Google is now writing 25% of all their code with AI. Understanding that if you are a cloud engineer, let's say you're in the United States, and all of a sudden, I need to save money as a business. What's going to happen is I'm going to cut all those cloud engineering jobs in the US and I'm going to hire them overseas for the lowest price I can. And I'm going to outsource the rest to AI. So in the world of AI, I would not look at an engineering role. And I love engineers. They're super important, but I worry about it. Now, why can't an architect be laid off with technology? Well, because if I'm an architect, I've got to lead an architectural review board. That means talking to people. I've got to sell a solution to the client or the board. I've got to give presentations every single day. I've got to build relationships, because if nobody's just going to give me $1 billion purchase order without a relationship. So I need relationships. I now need to entertain clients. I need now to meet with people. You can't replace me with AI. And here's the thing, Claude. I want you to think about this. As an architect, I bring in money. If I work for Azure as a solutions architect, I present a $1 billion solution. The $1 billion comes into Azure, and it pays me and all my peers salaries. They can't afford to get rid of me. But if I'm in that engineering world where I'm sitting behind, I got my glasses on, I'm coding on the screen all day long, and now I'm in California and I've got a $200,000 job. Bye, Mike. I hired somebody in India for $48,000, which is the equivalent of what you're receiving in California.
Mhm.
And now I don't have as many legal challenges I have to deal with. I have less regulations that I have to deal with. And now I got a person that's going to be so excited to work, because $200,000 to live in California, you might still be poor depending upon where you're at, where the average single home costs $1.5 million. But 50,000 US dollars in India is like 200,000 American dollars with prices that are a quarter of American. So it could be worth 500,000 or 600,000. So keep that in the back of your mind. Engineering is very dangerous. I love engineers, but I would not be going into engineering. And the reality is there's a lot of competition for the cloud engineering roles, which you won't face as an architect. Because the reality is I do 6,000 interviews for architects. I've been able to hire less than 50 over the last 25 years, because almost all of them are prepared as engineers, which is the exact opposite of an architect. So figure out what career you want and learn it, but don't expect to learn how to be an airplane pilot by learning how to fix the engines on an airplane. And that's what the cloud engineers do. And I've got examples of people like Harsha that were cloud engineers for a decade before they came to us and we retrained them. Jawad was a cloud engineer for over 10 years. We retrained him and got hired by AWS as a solution architect. He had interviewed with AWS many times before us. But until we taught him architecture skills, which are not engineering skills, he couldn't work as an architect. Yeah. And I'll tell you, half of our students have been engineers for 5-10 years, but nobody's going to hire them as an architect because they have engineering skills, not architecture skills.
And also think about this as well, Claude. You kind of answered your own question. There are fewer cloud architect jobs compared to cloud engineers. Reason being is that cloud engineers, that's a very saturated market from a global perspective. Fewer cloud architect jobs are the ones that really incur a large salary. And the reason why the salaries are there is because, just as Mike illustrated, very few people, less than 50%, understand the job. It's never tech driven. It's about understanding the business and why and how they want to use technology to improve their business. So we need, in a matter sheet, you're going to have your herd, you're going to have, the shepherd be able to design the architecture for you all as engineers to build it. We cannot build something we don't know anything about. So that requires those discussions, require those relationships, understanding, going back to the business and understanding where they've been, where they want to be, and how we can take them there. So that's why, instead of focusing on engineering to transition into the architecture, it's not going to help you get closer to becoming an architect. It just helps you become and continue being what you already are. So we encourage everyone, based off of where we see the market going, where we see the role of the engineering as we know it, it's going to change. It's not going to stay the same, and it's not going to stay the same for long. So we have the resources to share, but also please do your own due diligence and understand where cloud engineer roles are going versus architectural roles.
Yeah.
Mohammed, technical or business or both should divide those factors between teams that are guided by architect, which it can distribute objectives and improve effort to present to customers.
So typically the lead architect is going to be focused on the business, and they're going to shift the technical things to other people. But we could be in a big bank. For example, at JP Morgan Chase has 2,000 AI people. They're going to have a lot of architects there. We may have an architect also have to divide some of the business functions amongst other architects too, based on the side.
King. Mike, I have seen many cloud architect roles that appear more technical. Done business. Do the roles depend on industry and size of the companies you work for?
So, King, meaning you've seen the roles. Have you worked for the company in these roles? Or are you referring to job descriptions, which are the most meaningless garbage I've ever seen in my life? So, Tyrone or Chris in the background, can you pop a link to the Amazon VP? His name is Ethan Evans' post that he produced last week. And while we're at it, can you, Tyrone or Chris, whoever's back there, can you go out there and find the video where I interviewed the CEO of ITXL, which is a national recruiting firm, on why job descriptions are completely worthless and completely meaningless. So here's the key. Let's say I want to hire an architect. Now, what I'm usually going to do is call HR or finance, because that's what I have to do, and they're going to write a job description. Now, HR and finance know nothing related to what an architect does. So what does HR and finance usually do? And you can see this in Ethan's post because he talks about how it was done at Amazon. So HR and finance, they'll write a ridiculous job description by going to some other website, copying and pasting it. And now you got a list of 10 different job descriptions that all relate to 50 other people's jobs that you're never going to do. Never been on a job that I've been hired where I had more than 10% of the skills on a job description, but my 10% of the skills are there. In fact, it's so bad with cloud architect job descriptions. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing we've ever seen. That ultimately what happened was CIO Magazine actually was in Gartner actually interviewed chief information officers, which are our boss, by the way, and they asked them, what would you like cloud architects to do on a daily basis? And it's very interesting what they said. And Tyrone, drop a link to this presentation, or drop a link to the CIO Magazine article as well. And I know I sent you on a lot of goose chases there, Tyrone, so thank you. So according to Gartner, who Gartner went and interviewed chief information officers, our management, and said, what do you want in a cloud architect? They said that the primary things they want the cloud architect to do is to lead the cultural change for cloud adoption. And if you ever hear me talk about meeting with the executives, meeting with the stakeholders, finding the champions of the stakeholders and building a marketing campaign around your architecture, that's leading the cultural change for cloud adoption. Now, the cloud architect next develops and coordinates the cloud architecture. That's what I'm talking about. Learning the organization, learning their business people, business processes, learning their key business goals and initiatives, their technical challenges, their business challenges, creating an architecture team and coordinating the development of that architecture, the design. And then the last thing that CIOs said they want their cloud architects doing is developing a cloud strategy and coordinating the adoption process. Now, then people said, okay, we see these job descriptions that have tech stuff on it, and we know architects don't do tech stuff, which is true. Architects don't do tech stuff. So what did the CIOs say? We would like our architects to help find talent with the necessary skills, our cloud architects. That's why I've interviewed 6,000 people. We want people that can assess the software and hardware. That's creating that architecture team. The next thing they say is, in parentheses, is to create a cloud broker team. That's that team that I'm talking about, all those specialists that are going to design our cloud architecture. And then they talk about establishing best practices for the cloud across the company. Absolutely. Here's our incident response procedures. Each demilitarized zone will be designed by this. Each each operating system must be locked down and hardened by the inclusion of host-based IDS, IPS systems, for example, anti-malware, removal of services, what have you. And then the next thing CIOs said we want our cloud architects to do was oversee governance and mitigate risk. We talked about that earlier today. And then it said to work with IT security people to monitor privacy and develop incident response procedures. Absolutely. So we have to create incident response procedures. If a fire were to occur, what do we do? If a security event were to occur, who comes in, who does what, how many engineers do we need, what legal does, who speaks to the regulators, who speaks to the press. Always doing that in incident response plan. And then the last thing that CIO Magazine said they wanted their architects to do was manage budgets and estimate costs. So they actually created this whole article and this whole job description specifically because people were training on all the wrong skills to be a cloud architect. So I kind of hope that helps.
RO, hi Mike. How will your training afford me the work experience that are always advertised for these roles, particularly coming from a background without architectural experience? Thanks.
Well, here's the thing, RO, we got to get our first job. I've just given you probably 20 or 30 examples of people that got hired. No one cares about your experience except for the HR people that like to auto-reject you. No one cares. And here's the reason no one cares. I interview people with 20 years experience and they don't know anything. I interview people that have never had a tech job and they might know something. So what is it that the employer really cares about for real? What is it that they're looking for? They want to know that you can do the job. Now, granted, if I interview 1,000 engineers and each engineer gives me tech and code when I ask them a question, I can't hire a single one of them. I'm going to make that very clear. Last week, I had a new student in England. His name begins with an E. I'm not going to say anymore because I'm still filling out his background check. They made him the offer and I'm filling out his thing today. That's another person that just got hired, but that's in England. He never worked in tech before either, but it didn't matter. But he went on the single interview, and they wouldn't even let him leave the building before he got hired. I had another student, Nafuli, again in UK. He was in Manchester, who just got hired as a CTO as his first job. Every job wants 5 years experience. They want 5 years experience for you to work as a food server at a restaurant. They want 5 years experience for you to be a front desk receptionist in a hotel to basically answer the phone and deal with clients. They want 5 to 15 years experience for you to do anything. Guess what? They wanted 10 years experience on my first job, and I had none. My next job wanted 15 years experience, but I did have 6 months. And the one after that, my first principal architect job that wanted 10 to 20 years experience, I did have 1.5 years experience. But what I was is I was good. What I was is I was focused. What I was learned everything that employers actually cared about. So I didn't have just the technical competency, which was half of it. I had the other things. I had the communication skills that employers are looking for to make sure we didn't make mistakes. I knew what I knew and I didn't know, and I explained that clearly. They saw my energy, my enthusiasm, and passion for the word. I made it clear how I was willing to go above and beyond, because employers want to hear this, and I made it clear that I was a team player. You do that, no one cares about your experience. They care, can you do it? So if I ask you an architecture question like, how would you design a demilitarized zone for a secure web application, and you can give me an intelligent answer, I might hire you. And I think it was one of our cloud engineers that we trained that went to AWS on an interview, talked about security, and they were like, oh, you're an expert on security. Well, that's all I needed to know. And it's happened with other companies too. In fact, I had some person, a TV host from a part of Africa, really great guy, that had applied for a cloud security admin role, and they told him it wasn't a good enough role for him. He applied because he had no experience. So then he tried to be the cloud security architect role, and they said like, it's still too junior for them, and they moved him to a CISO's office of a very major organization. And that's the key. They care what you can do, not what you've done. All right, I ask you a question. Who would you hire in these two? Actually, I'm going to ask Alonzo the question. Alonzo, I've got 2 cybersecurity people to hire. Person 1 is a high school dropout. Person 1 hacked into the Pentagon successfully. In addition to hacking into the Pentagon, they actually hacked into a big cable company and was able to shut them down for 15 minutes. Now, this person didn't graduate high school. Now, by comparison, I've got someone here to the right. This person has a PhD in cybersecurity. This person has a CISSP, CISM, CCSP. This person has a TOGAF certification. The 16-year-old hacker broke into their organization. Who do I hire and who do I fire?
I'm going to have to go with the 16-year-old, and here's why. Because it's never been about the experience. He's competent. For him to go through multi-encrypted environment for the Department of Defense, the United States DoD, is considerable, although unethical. But the point is that it's the competency. He understood what to do, where to go, how to do it, back doors to get into. The list goes on, versus someone who has multiple certifications, but they don't have the competency, which is a big difference. And not to belittle any of these awesome certifications, I have plenty myself. But when it comes to that, it teaches you how to do something within that sphere or take a test. But for someone to actually do executables like that, different level.
And we'll keep going. We're going to talk about your AWS Solutions Architect certification and why it's not going to help you get hired soon. So please stick around.
Okay. Duncan, as a cloud architect, do we need to acquire specific knowledge for various cloud service provider services, or do we need to focus on cloud agnostic solutions? For example, specific roles that may require certifications.
So if we're a cloud architect, I can't use any of that cloud provider specific stuff in most cases because it puts me into a very dangerous and a bad situation where I don't have interoperability. So what am I really mastering as a cloud architect? Mostly network and data center solutions. Because what are we really dealing with the cloud? An outsourced data center. So as a cloud architect, I need you to know how to design your Nutanix or OpenStack data center. Because we're going to have to work with it. When you put workloads on the public cloud and they cost too much, I need you to understand how to take them back. So I do need you to have some knowledge. Like, for example, I keep a cheat sheet that says, all right, for my virtual machines, AWS calls them EC2, Azure calls them Azure Virtual Machines, Oracle calls them or just virtual machines, and Google calls it a compute engine instance. So I, generally speaking, have a sheet for that. Okay, blocks. Okay, object storage. I know all about object storage because I could be dealing with object storage from Dell EMC. I could be dealing with object storage from many object storage providers, or I could be dealing with object storage in AWS, Azure, or Google. Now, of course, AWS will call it Amazon Simple Storage. And of course, the marketing people at Google will call it cloud storage. And the marketing people at Microsoft said, we're going to call it blob. But it's the same thing. So build yourself a cheat sheet of it. Now, do understand the idiosyncrasies and major weaknesses inside of the cloud providers and weaknesses that they have. They're going to get you. But you have to focus on the bigger picture. And in each time you design something, ideally, you've got a solution architect that's going to have more expertise in that various provider. And you're going to. Because let's say I'm a cloud architect for a big bank. I'm focused on the big thing, and I'm going to talk. Then I'm going to call Microsoft. I'm going to call Google. I'm going to call Amazon. I'm going to talk to them. Talk to me about your various virtual machines and their performance limitations. Talk to me about this. Okay, here's the server I have. What's the exact processor in it? Because you don't really tell me. What's the single core performance of that versus the multi-threaded performance? I'm going to have to go back and forth many times with the solutions architect. So mostly think about the technology and how the technology works and how it fits together. And if and when you need to get more specific, we'll just dive down deeper because our fundamentals are going to be so good. At least, Duncan, and I know who you are, and you're very solid. And I know we were getting your training. Thank you for joining us. But knowing things like that, you'll be in good shape because you're always going to know. If you know the BGP protocol. In my first job, I was at Cisco. In my second job, I was putting BGP because when I was still an engineer on a Juniper device. The next thing I know, I'm designing BGP on Riverstone Networks devices. Right after that, I'm dealing with BGP on somebody else's devices. It doesn't matter. It's the same BGP.
So if you all have any questions, we definitely have a lot of other things that we're working on, a lot of awesome things for 2025 that Go Cloud Careers is rolling out. You're going to be very excited. I have been put on a gag order to not say anything as of yet because we are still in the proverbial lab before we share it, but it's going to be very, very awesome. But we really want to share. Also, please continue to ask your questions. We can be here for another 15 minutes. And if not, then definitely we're always focused on improving who we are as Go Cloud Careers, improving who you are as students, and how we can continually focus on anything that we can do to improve your experience. Mm-hmm. Curious, in your enterprise architecture program, do you teach how to interpret these financial statements and also how to extract the pertinent details to tailor solutions based on different needs?
Of course we do, Curious Gringo. If we weren't teaching you how to read balance sheets and how to read financial statements, and we weren't teaching you business process re-engineering, you wouldn't be an enterprise architect. And that's the reason why we have to retrain people, because people go and they get an AWS solutions architect professional and they learn no architecture along the way. None. They learn systems administration. And that's why I would typically have to retrain people that have taken boot camps. Most of our people have already come to us with 6 certifications, multiple boot camps, and we ask them basic architecture questions. And guess what? They don't know any of it because they've learned all the wrong skills. So, of course, we teach how to do that. Of course, we teach presenting to the board. Of course, we teach what CEOs care about. Of course, we teach like various business operating models and what we would use. Of course, we would teach you the management and strategy consulting part of this. Of course, we would teach you the executive skills like the CXO relevancy, the sales, how to present like an executive. And of course, we're going to give you the business knowledge to do what you need to. That's why it's an enterprise architect program. But it's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it.
Dimitri, for now, in the European Union, the demand for AI architects is much higher than for enterprise architects. Could you please comment on that?
So, Dimitri, it's kind of an interesting situation, and these go temporarily flush back and forth. Right now, I mean, I've been working in AI since 2001. David Lithicum's been working with AI since 1985. AI is not new. What happened is we were hardware constrained on the graphics performance, the GPUs that we had. We had very little in the way of fully programmable ASICs and other things that could do things fast in hardware. And now the technology is ready for us. So as soon as people saw ChatGPT, the rest of the world woke up to things that David Lithicum and I've been doing for the last few decades. Now everybody wants AI. Now, Dimitri, the reason that you'll see a temporary surge in AI architects, and Dimitri, we train AI architects, David Lithicum does, it's an incredible program. Here's the thing I need you to remember. And yes, for the next 3 to 5 years, there will be a surplus of AI architect jobs, and they will pay extraordinarily well due to supply and demand curves, which I'll show you right now if you guys like, because me and macroeconomics, I'll always have some fun. But then I'm ultimately also going to have to show you why, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter by any stretch of the imagination which one of these things that you actually get to, and why there's so much enterprise architecture demand anyway. But let me bear with me. I want to basically share something with you, and I want you to feel this, because for economists like me, and of course we teach economics like macroeconomics, for example, in an enterprise architect program, because if you didn't have these skills, you wouldn't be able to work. So let's say I take you to this particular environment. I don't know what actually happened here, so let me play with this a little bit. I was making it for security architects. It doesn't matter any kind of architect, but let's talk about supply and demand curves. So at the end of the day, let's say that AI skills in general are pretty short, whether it's from an architect perspective or an engineer perspective. So what we'll see is you're going to have an intersection of the supply and demand curve here. And as we have more supply, notice the intersection is lower on the price. As we have less supply, notice the intersection is here. So if we're dealing with something like a software developer, there's a given demand, but there's so many software developers in any part of the world, and AI can code. So you're typically dealing with a lower paid salary for these types of jobs, because so many people can do it. Go to college, learn how to code. Want to play, learn how to code. So not really typically a high-paying job in today's world with the software engineering side of it. And that's where you see that intersection where that blue dot is pretty low. Bear with me. I'm trying to do this. So now let's come back with that same supply and demand curve. So now the quantity gets reduced. The quantity is down. So because the quantity is down, let's look what happens. People in general AI skills. Note that point of impact price-wise was down here, and now all of a sudden it's over here. Now, what's going to ultimately happen that you're going to show, and now you've got an AI architect that, in addition to knowing AI, has business skills, leadership skills, sales skills, executive skills, emotional intelligence skills, and business acumen. Now this is sky high. And there's going to be a lot of runway for architects to earn a lot. And that's why I work with David Lithicum to create a great AI architect program. But here's what I also want you to understand. 80% of all technology projects fail, meaning 80% of the time a company invests in technology, they get no business value. Now, it happened with internet technology. It happened with cloud computing technology. It happened with data center technology. And who are the people that are going to get it right? And why is it, Dimitri, that these business initiatives are failing, these architectures are failing? Because you get a solution architect that comes to you and they're all excited about their new technology and they just want to put it in the business without thinking about what value it provides for the business. They pick the best technology and they throw it there, but it affects the way people work in a negative manner. And then poof, all the money was wasted. And then they hire an enterprise architect to actually go fix it in the first place. So at the end of the day, you'll see these big cycles. Everybody went to the cloud. Nobody got a benefit. So half of the people on the cloud are going back to the data center, while other workloads are going to the cloud. And that stuff's cloud architecting, more enterprise architecting. But I love the AI architect role. It is a great role. And in the short term, there are more of the AI architect roles where you're at in the European Union. If I was going to go home in Greece, I could find a work from home AI architect job in my village in Greece. But it'll be a little harder there depending upon where you're at. Now, if you were in Germany, not a problem for an enterprise architect job. If you were in France, not a problem for an enterprise architect job. If you were in England, not a problem for an enterprise architect job. In Spain, you're probably still good. Now, if you're in Greece or if you're going Bulgaria, it's going to be a little tighter for some of these roles. I'm from Greece, but in some of those countries have smaller economies than other. I hope that makes sense.
Malik Arjuna, AWS Solutions Architect Associate certification will really benefit me to land a job. Then how much experience? Because I have 2 years, but not able to find out.
Well, what job are you actually looking for? I need to know that first. Because I'll tell you, if your goal is architecture, your AWS Solutions Architect Professional is not going to be anything, is going to be about 5 to 9% of what you need. If you wanted to be an engineer, I can tell you what you need, but I need to know which role you actually want. For example, if you wanted to be a cloud engineer, I would say my minimum would be an AWS Solutions Architect Professional, a Red Hat certified engineer for my Linux thing, and I probably might do a Terraform thing if I wanted to be a cloud engineer. If I was a cloud engineer, I would spend a tremendous amount of time working with Linux, installing features and functionality on Linux. I would be updating kernels on Linux. I'd be installing applications. I'd be creating virtual machines, for example, if I was going to be a cloud engineer. I'd be working with so many things. But I need to know what career you're actually looking for.
I believe he's focused on DevOps, Mike.
Let's confirm that from him. I don't want to. Oh, he says DevOps because of your experience. You don't. Whatever your experience is irrelevant. Let's talk about what you want to do. I don't hire someone based upon experience. I hire them based upon their skills. What would you like to do?
Yeah.
And if it's DevOps, are you a software developer first? If you're not going to be working in DevOps. And what have you done to learn DevOps? And what have you done to learn DevOps tools? Not AWS tools, but DevOps tools. Because you listed a certification portfolio, and it usually upsets me when I see it. What I saw was AWS Solutions Architect Associate, Certified Kubernetes Associate, and another Kubernetes thing. And when I get that, I'm not going to call you back from HR or hiring manager. And here's why I don't care. I don't care about any associate level certifications. Associate level certification is like a pre-fundamental certification. Like you're almost ready to do something. You're prepared for the education that's going to come next. So if I've got someone that's got 10 associate certifications, what they've shown me is they went intro level things in 10 different things. I don't want them on my team. I want somebody with skill on my team. So that's what we're actually looking for. No associate certification. So if I got someone that make the biggest cloud mistake, somebody told people to do the AWS Cloud Practitioner, the AWS DevOps Associate, the AWS SysOps Associate, the AWS Developer Associate, the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, a Kubernetes Associate, and in the end, I can't hire this person for anything. Because what they have is almost enough skills in 5 different people's careers, but almost enough to get started in each one. But the combination of all 5 is meaningless to me. Because I don't hire a hobbyist airplane pilot. I don't hire a hobbyist doctor. I don't hire a hobbyist lawyer, all in the same person. If I need a physician, I look for the best. If I need a lawyer, I look for someone great, someone who focused their whole life on law, not half airplane flying, half becoming a physician. So I want someone good. So I hope that helps. So if you tell me what you want to do, not based upon your experience, I can build you a plan to get there. Because you're trying to drive your future based upon your experience, which is really like saying yesterday night, which is true. It was my wife's birthday, and we went to Miller's Ale House, my favorite restaurant, and I actually had a cheeseburger on a whole grain roll, and I had 3 broccolis there. But I don't normally eat bread. And it was a double cheeseburger, actually, which is, again, even a little worse. It's not my normal thing. So guess what? I ate that yesterday. I woke up this morning. I practiced 90 minutes of yoga in my 160-degree room, and I felt good. Yesterday's dinner was over. Today, I chose to eat a different path. I used to practice internal medicine. I decided I was going to work on networking. 6 months later, I had a job in networking. 12 months later, I was one of the first CCIEs in the world. All I know is I focused on that as networking. I didn't learn Linux. I didn't learn nothing. All I learned was networking. And that's why I got my first job as a senior engineer, was promoted to lead architect in 3 months. So what does he want to do? And I'll build you a plan. But you're not going to get there by getting certifications. You're going to need to learn skills that are far greater than certifications.
I believe we have, no, hello, Mike. Is there any role like the enterprise security architect? What is required for this role?
Absolutely not. The second you focus on security, you lost the business process engineering, you lost the compute, you lost the storage, you lost everything. So the second you did that, you're delegating yourself into the solutions architect role. You can't get out of it when you go too specialized.
Got to stay.
The whole point of the enterprise. That's the whole point of the enterprise architecture role, is that you'll be in a position.
Paul Johnson, how do we gauge our level of competency so we know we aren't selling ourselves short or setting ourselves up for failure? Having that level of confidence can be crucial to success.
Yeah, and that's the key. And Malkhajana, I'm wondering if there's a way you can send me your LinkedIn profile, because I can tell you why you're not getting interviews based upon your LinkedIn profile in about a second, if you want me to. If you want to share your LinkedIn profile. And I can make it very clear why you're not getting responses, because I know what to look for. So send that. So how do you gauge your level of competency because you aren't selling yourself short? So if I asked you, how would you design your demilitarized zone for a web application for a mission critical military installment, would you know how to do it? If I asked you to create a 99.999% high availability system that leverages 3 clouds, what do you need to do it? And it's more than just 3 clouds and no single points of failure. What goes in there? If I were to tell you that right now we have plans of an AI system in the future, I would need you to understand what kind of data we already have, what kind of data we're going to need to collect in the future, what kind of, for example, data hygiene practices do we need, what kind of mapping and reduction type services do we need to go from the relational database, NoSQL database, data warehouse, and generic object storage into someplace else where I can normalize that data. Now, once I've normalized that data, how will I catalog that data? What type of AI or machine learning could we run on that data? Now, if we want to use that data for generative AI, now that we've collected our data, what kind of model should we build? Small language model, large language model? How do we train that model, for example? What type of compute do we need? Can we do it on the CPU? Do we do it on a GPU? Do we need a lot of GPUs? See, Paul, when you can start answering those questions, you're ready for architecture. Because you understand that you're piecing these modules together and goes. When you can think about building a statement of work for the architecture that's going to be designed, you're ready to go. When you can explain technology and systems to a 5-year-old, you're good to go. Because you're going to have to present it to executives. When you can read financial statements and balance sheets, when you can look at an organization's key business processes and figure out what they need and the systems that are going to support those business processes, you are ready to go.
Stephen, what are your thoughts on the business architect role? Does the enterprise architect program prepare you for this?
So mostly, but I'll talk about the difference. I've been a business architect. As a rule, the business architect role requires an MBA. Because the business architect is called the management consultant, or they're called the strategy consultant. And typically we business architects, we work for a big 4 consulting firm like Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, those types of environments. And we go from a client, we sell a consulting engagement, then we do our consulting, we document it, and we go to the next client and the next client. Is this a fun role? Yeah, it's awesome. Love it. And I've been there and I've done that role. Now, because of the high amount of management and strategy consulting we have in our business architect program, because we teach business process re-engineering, and because we go pretty deeply into business architecture, I'd say that our program is about 3/4 of the way there for a business architect. Now, I will also tell you, Stephen, that if you were to take our elite program, and Tyrone, you can pop that in, that program would prepare you for a business architect role. Because it's the enterprise architect program, but it's all that other stuff that from an MBA perspective you would typically need. And how did I create that MBA content? Well, I did a couple of things, Stephen. There were 3 MBAs on our team that are all functioning as C-suite executives that created content. I also hired 2 incredible PhD business school professors that are teaching at the University of Tennessee at Martin. Dr. Jamie Long, I believe, is the department head or the dean of the business school right now. And Dr. Cooper Johnson used to be the department head or the dean of many business schools. So that's the kind of what we're actually using. So yeah, that one will get you prepared for business architect roles.
Freedom Lands, how do we deal with setbacks, failure, and slow progress on our way to accomplish our career goals?
Keep your failures quiet. I see all these people, they go to LinkedIn today, and I failed at this. Now, then they'll say, I failed at this. And now the manager's going to think, failed. Why do I want this person on my team? They're going to fail. See, people like to say, learn from your mistakes, but they don't want you to make mistakes at work. So don't post your failures. Don't post your setbacks. So what you have to do when you fail, you really need a root cause analysis, exactly what you're actually talking about. And realistically speaking, this is what I'm actually referring to. So let's say something failed. Why did it fail? Did you focus on the wrong thing? Did you solve the wrong problem? Did you not have the required knowledge and information base? Think about those things. So find out why. Now, how do you show your accomplishments? Well, not like the average character does it on LinkedIn. Exciting. I can't believe this. I spent 9 months and I finally passed this AWS certification. Please do not do that. You can post your AWS Solutions Architect Professional. This is one of the certifications I wanted to do this year. Great. Why? Because if the hiring manager on a scale of 1 to 10 is worth a 2 or a 3, and you acted like it was the biggest thing in the world, you just showed that you don't understand what they need. So talk about things. Today I had a chance to present at this conference. It was really wonderful to discuss this, its impact on business, and it was incredibly great to meet people from these organizations. Here's a copy of the slides that I used in this presentation. I hope it's meaningful to you. Tell me your thoughts. That's a different kind of a post, because now you're showing something that you did, something that you accomplished. I actually I was analyzing the problems that existed in this industry. And here's the statistical analysis that I actually used. Now, after seeing these various industry challenges, many organizations could benefit this and this. This specific architecture could benefit this and these challenges. This specific architecture could benefit these. So what are you showing? You're actually showing them that you're doing the job. So you're actually posting your job. So when someone says, I made a WordPress website and they want to tell me they want to be a cloud engineer, I'm like, oh, great. You're not making WordPress websites. Get that off of your resume. Mm-hmm. When somebody says, here's my Linux projects and my Linux skills, I want to be an architect. And I'm like, you just told me you're not an architect. You're studying things that are not related to architecture. So show that everything that you do is aligned with what your goals are. Show, because everything together makes up your brand. How you communicate it, how you present it. Is it video, audio? If it's video, are you showing executive presence? Are you showing that gravitas? If you're not, you're hurting your chances for an architecture job. And while you develop that executive presence, while you develop that gravitas, now you're in a position that you'll be taken more seriously. So use whatever assets you have.
And make sure that your emotions don't outweigh the progress you've made. Sometimes you wake up feeling great. Sometimes you wake up feeling bad. And you let that lead how you feel or your effectiveness, or look through your perceptions of, I'm feeling crap. So, I'm feeling like garbage. So obviously my outcome must be garbage. Make sure your emotions do not take the reins on your progress or how you view yourself. This is a process. That's why architects in all its different fields, cloud, enterprise, principal, make the big bucks, because not everyone can do it, because not everyone continues to be focused on the goals. So make sure your goals are focused every day. Make sure your discipline determines your outcome. Continually strive for success. And your setbacks, failure, and slow progress will be inverted into focused success, progress, wins, and ultimately achieving your goals.
Yeah.
Raja, will AI architects need to transition into broader cloud or enterprise architect roles over time, or will cloud and enterprise architects evolve to include AI expertise as part of their responsibility?
Raja, a real cloud architect and enterprise architect right now have AI. Mm-hmm. And that's why in our cloud architect programs, our AI enterprise architect programs, we're still doing AI projects. Because if you don't know AI in today's world, honestly, there's not a lot of opportunity for you. So, but we'll still have specialty AI architect programs. We will definitely have them because it's the focus of the AI architect on just the AI. Now, imagine me, I'm the enterprise architect, or I'm a cloud architect still doing the same job as an enterprise architect, and I'm focusing on business processes. Now I'm focusing on org charts. Now I'm focusing on business architecture. Now I'm focusing on 1,000+ applications. Now I'm focusing on 15,000 remote locations. I don't have it in me to dive deep into anything. So even someone like me, someone that's an expert network architect, when I function in a bigger role, I still do enterprise-y architecture things because I never want to miss the business. And I truly believe every architect should study enterprise architecture. Tyrone, I made a video on that and talked about why. Even if you want to be a cloud architect or an AI architect, if you understand enterprise architecture, you're going to drive better results for your clients. You're not going to be one of those 80% of the things that don't make it. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
Back to Malik Arjuna. The price of your courses are much higher, sir. India 150 USD is too high.
Well, I got a perspective on that. So if you went to the Indian Institute of Technology, what would that cost you to get a job that's going to pay less than what you would get out of our program? So O came to us with a $150,000 job, went to Google and got a $409,000 job in about a year for $2,500. So realistically speaking, you got a $250,000 raise for $2,500. I think that's a pretty good return on investment. Daniel talked publicly about living in his car when he was in our program. And I can guarantee you he had a job when I asked him, could you afford 2 Mercedes on your own place? And the answer is yes. Delroy was another guy that came to us. And again, I asked these same people. He came to us working on it as an ambulance on emergency as a medical technician. That's a $15 an hour job approximately. And he left our course with a cloud security architect job for CDW. And I said, can you afford 2 brand new Mercedes and a new brand new single 4-bedroom house? And he said, of course I can with my salary. So if you think that spending $1,500 for a $200,000 or a $300,000 equivalent job is a lot, I'd invite you to compare medical school, which is about $500,000 to earn a little less than a cloud architect. I'd invite you to think about law school, which pays a little less than a cloud architect. And if it's too expensive, that's fine. You don't have to take it. But you also mentioned that it's been 2 years. So you've now spent 2 years without getting the kind of job you want. And even if you had a $40,000 or $50,000 job in India, which is like a cloud architect, it's probably a lot more that you're at. So if you think $1,500 is enough to lose $100,000 over 2 years, I can respect your ability to think that way. It's okay. And I'm not here to change your mind. Architecture is a business role. Architecture is determining a return on investment capital. And architecture is determining what your life's worth. Would you prefer to have a job that pays you $50,000 a year equivalent in India? Or would you a job that pays $24,000 a year? And if it only costs you $1,500 to get there, I think that's awfully cheap. But then again, I spent over $300,000 on my education. Alonzo, what'd your MBA cost?
6
just
figures.
Your MBA. Yeah, 6 figures just for your MBA. So again, it's all there. But there's a reason I was able to retire at 34 because the education and the right education got me to my goals. So I think you need to think about what your goals are and develop a realistic plan to get there. It doesn't have to be me. You can go get an MBA at IIT, for example, and that'll get you half of the way there. You can then take presentation, sales, and executive skills. And I provide it there. So it's all up to you. It's all up to you. You take our course, you stay in our course until you're hired. So that you take our course, the only reason you don't get hired is if you don't do the work and you don't show up to class. Because we'll keep you in the program until you're hired. But it's all up to you. And I can't tell you what's right or what's wrong for you. I can just provide great training that's gotten our students hired at Apple, at Amazon, at Cisco, at Google, at IBM, at Microsoft, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Google, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, MUFG Bank, Archetype, CDW, Praviti over in the UK. That's probably enough companies that I need to talk about. Palo Alto Networks. That's another place where we've got people. Zscaler, a great security company. So that's us. And you can look at some videos of some people in India that we've gotten hired. We've got videos on our YouTube channel of people that have gotten their first job in India as an architect. It's not hard to get a job in India as an architect. It's nothing. It's hard to get a job when you don't have the skills to be an architect, like any other place. And remember, Dibia also got hired an architect. Got hired. She was young. She also got a job. So it was Dibia. There was this really the one guy that sends me a nice message every Teacher's Day. I'm trying to think of his name right now, but it's been so many people in India that have gotten hired. It's not an issue for you getting hired. You have to have the right skills. And everything you've studied so far is exactly the opposite skills. So if I asked you, how would you design an AI system to make a recommendation engine to increase sales, could you do it? So I just want you to think about that. Let's do one more. I think there's one more. No, we actually got to that one. For some reason, I thought there was an additional one, Tyrone. And otherwise, we'll finish up.
I hear Cindy.
Yeah, you hear Cindy. Everybody fusses over Cindy. All right. Any last questions on what we do as architects?
Cloud Doctor is asking, how long is the program?
Until the person is hired. So here's the thing. You know, one of the things that's bad about boot camps, which is why I don't have a boot camp, is the following. Somebody signs up. They're there for 16 weeks. Maybe they learned it all in 16 weeks. Maybe they didn't. And let's say it takes them 6 months to get hired. So what's going on in the 6 months from the time the person left the program to the time they're hired? They're forgetting everything that they learned. So with us, you take the program, you stay in the program until the day you are hired. And that means you've got a year in the live classes, unlimited on the online parts. We're consistently updating it because we want to know that you get hired. And the only time somebody doesn't get hired in our program, for the most part, is if they drop out and don't do the work. So we make it pretty clear. You know, I've got somebody that takes a year and a half. The person in Dallas who just got hired now took a year and a half. And he's been in tech for 40 years. By comparison, the person in England who just got hired this week never worked in tech before in his life. And he was with us for a little while, but he's super, super smart. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. All of you have any opportunity you want with us, without us. But whether you train with us or you train somewhere else, Cloud Doctor, the key is you have to have these skills. And nobody's going to give you these skills. You're going to have to develop them. And it's the skills that determine if you're hired. Would you let somebody fly on an airplane that didn't know how to fly a plane with 250 people in it? So no. Some character at Google deleted a $240 billion hedge fund. Well, that's a career limiting move, but that's another story. Somebody took down the BGP cloud because they didn't, the Google cloud because they didn't know BGP. Somebody took down the entire country of India and Cloudflare because they didn't understand BGP. So it matters. And that's what it comes about. But when I hire someone, I get fake resumes all day long. I get about 1,000 interviews, 1,000 garbage resumes. I don't care what's on somebody's resume. I care what happens when I interview them, what they can do, and so can hiring managers. So my suggestion is, if you're not sure, ask a hiring manager what it's like interviewing people. Ask how hard it is to find the skills, and ask why companies do it when they find someone and they see it. So I hope everybody learned exactly what it takes to be an architect. I hope you're understanding the actual architect skills, and you're starting to see that, look, learning sysops, not going to help me here. Learning code, not going to help me here. Learning Python, not going to help me. Learning Linux, not going to help me. Learning the way systems work, how they're put together, how they're architected, that's the secret to getting things great. So hope you all had a wonderful day. Now give me a hashtag with the actual career you really wanted after hearing about all these architect careers. The point of education and training is to change behavior. So I'm curious, do you all want the same job? And if so, great. Or now that you understand the roles, do you have a different perspective? Let's finish on that. Give me some data that I can actually look at, because I love data. Cloud Doctor, I like that. Freedom Lance, you're more than welcome. Always good to see you. Who do you choose to be? I know I've had them all. My favorite is the Enterprise Architect role, but I like them all. Enterprise Architect makes sense. Meg, Cloud Architect, terrific. It's a great role. Dimitri, great position with the Enterprise. If I'm mispronouncing your name or I'm using a Greek pronunciation for your name, apologies. I know a lot of Dimitris. Freedom Lands Enterprise Architect. I had a feeling when people actually understand the roles and what we do in these roles, most people will take Mr. AB Enterprise Architect. I had a feeling. I'm actually curious about that. That's why. And now you know the continuum and you know the types of things that we actually do. All right. Well, tomorrow I'm going to come back with Mark Milovanovic, and we're going to talk about BGP. Jose, wonderful Enterprise Architect. After speaking with you, I think that would be the perfect thing for you. I think that would be very smart. So tomorrow we have a BGP workshop. Later this week, we have Russ White, a distinguished network architect that's going to be coming and talking to us. We've got another interview day on Friday. And of course, on Thursday, we have a How to Become an Architect webinar where we'll cover every single skill. And Raj, I love BGP too. It's like one of my favorite things. So take care, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks again, everyone. See you next time.